welcome to a deep dive. This one is going to be about the Aarushi Hemraj murder case.
Oh, this is a fascinating one. A lot of twists and turns.
It really is, and we're going to, unpack it together using a couple of YouTube sources that you sent.
Okay, sounds good.
It's not just a whodunit, though. This case, it really shows how all the media hype and the mistakes in the investigation and even society biases, it all makes it really hard to find out what really happened.
Absolutely. It becomes like a fog. It's hard to see clearly.
So let's start with the basic. We're in Noida, India. It's 2008.
Okay.
The Talwar family, they seem pretty normal, right? Rajesh and Nupur are successful dentists.
Yeah.
They've got a 13-year-old daughter, Aarushi. They have a live-in domestic helper, Hemraj.
Right. Seems like a pretty standard family.
Living in a gated community. It seems pretty average.
And that's why this whole thing is so shocking.
Exactly. It's so jarring because they just seem so normal.
Yeah.
So it's May 15th, right? The day before Arushi's birthday. Her parents give her a camera, a Sony camera.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, because she loved photography, but that night, things start to get a little strange. Around 11 p.m., Rajesh asks Nupur to go turn on the internet router.
The router?
Yeah.
Why is that important?
Well, the thing is, the router was in Arushi's room for some reason.
Okay, now that is odd. Why would the router be in the kids' room?
Right. That becomes a big deal later on. Because Nupur says she saw Aarushi reading in bed when she turned it on, but nobody's really sure if she locked the door when she left.
Wait, so the doors, they were self-locking?
Yeah, in a hotel. So whether the door was locked or not is a huge part of the whole story.
I see.
Then there's this whole internet log thing. So Rajesh is online until about midnight, but then the router shows activity until 12:08 a.m. Plus, it looks like somebody turned the router on and off a bunch of times that night.
Someone was definitely up and about when they should have been asleep. That's suspicious.
Right, who was messing with the router? So fast forward to 6 a.m. the next morning. The housekeeper, Parthi Mandal, she gets to the apartment.
Okay.
Usually Hemraj opens the door, but he's not there. She rings the doorbell a bunch of times. Finally, Nupur opens the door.
Okay.
But it's super confusing because there are all these different stories about which doors were locked and unlocked.
Oh, so it's not clear what order things happened in.
Exactly. It's a mess.
And that's a problem, right? Because the state of those doors could be a big clue.
Yeah, maybe it shows somebody else was there.
Right.
Anyway, Parthi finally gets inside and she finds Aarushi.
Oh no.
She's dead in her bed. Somebody hit her with something and then cut her throat.
It's awful. Of course, the apartment is immediately flooded with people, neighbors, and family.
Chaos.
Total chaos. So by the time the police show up, the crime scene is already, totally messed up.
That's a huge problem in an investigation, isn't it? Oh, it's a disaster. It's they say 90% of the evidence was probably messed up before the forensics team even got there.
Wow. 90%?
Yeah.
That's unbelievable.
So the police, they start investigating, but there's no sign of forced entry. Nothing seems to be stolen. But then they find this bottle of Scotch whiskey in the kitchen. It's got bloody fingerprints all over it.
Interesting. So someone was drinking.
Yeah.
But not just any bottle, right? This is clue number one. It means whoever did this knew where to find that bottle. It suggests some familiarity with the apartment.
It does, because it was in a hidden minibar.
A hidden minibar, even creepier.
I know, right? And they had a drink after the murder.
That's chilling.
Super creepy. Okay, so then the story gets even crazier. There are bloodstains on the stairs leading up to the terrace door, but it's locked. At first, they just think it's an escape route, so they don't even bother looking.
Wait, what? They didn't check the terrace mirror?
Nope.
Why not?
Well, everybody's kind of focused on Hemraj at this point.
Right, because the assumption is that the servant did it.
Exactly. The police are looking for him, thinking he killed Aarushi and ran off.
And were the Talwars pushing that theory?
Yeah, actually, they were urging the police to find Hemraj, even offered a reward for his capture. But then the next day, everything changes. A retired police officer, KK Gautam, he goes to visit the Talwars, to offer his condolences.
Okay. Seems normal.
Right, but he notices those bloodstains leading up to the terrace. And he's like, hey, you gotta open that door.
Oh, wow, good catch.
So they open it up, and guess what?
They found Hemraj?
Yep, hidden under a cooler panel.
Oh my gosh.
Double murder, and if Hemraj is dead, who killed him?
Right, everything changes at this point.
Totally. That whole servant theory goes out the window.
And suddenly the spotlight is back on the parent.
Exactly, and then Arushi's personal life, especially her relationship with this guy, Anmol Agarwal, it all comes out. Anmol told the police that Aarushi had talked to him about her dad having an affair with a colleague, Anita Durrani.
An affair? Wow, this just keeps getting more complicated.
Right, affair, double murder. So the police hold a press conference, and it is a mess. They can't even pronounce Arushi's name right. It's a circus. And they publicly accuse Rajesh of killing both Aarushi and Hemraj because of this supposed affair. Then later that day, Rajesh is arrested, all on camera. It was crazy.
Wait, so they arrested him based on just the boyfriend's statement? There wasn't any actual proof?
Pretty much. It was all circumstantial.
Wow.
And of course, the media goes wild. They're painting Rajesh as a monster. Nupur manages to avoid arrest, but now everybody's suspicious of her too. She does this TV interview where she defends Rajesh, but people say she seems cold and detached.
It's amazing how much public perception can influence a case like this, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, how she acted on TV probably made people even more suspicious, even though there was no real evidence against her.
Right.
So we've got a contaminated crime scene, the police are making mistakes, the media is going crazy, and nobody knows what happened. It was clear the local police couldn't handle it. So they call in the Central Bureau of Investigation, the CBI.
Ah, the big guns. So they come in to try and sort out this mess.
Exactly. They have to try and figure out the truth behind the Aarushi Hemraj murders. And what's interesting is that the CBI, they start looking at something that the first investigators basically ignored Hemraj's room.
Okay, so they're going back to square one, taking a closer look at the scene.
Yep. And when we find there, changes everything.
Really? So what did they find in Hemraj's room that was so important? Well, the first investigators, they barely even glanced at Hemraj's room. It was like they had tunnel vision.
Huh.
But the CBI, they find evidence that there were actually multiple people in that room the night of the murders. Like they find beer bottles, Sprite cans, another whiskey bottle, several cups.
Sounds like a party.
Right. Kind of crazy to think about a party going on
while the murders were happening.
Yeah. There's even this unverified claim from that retired officer who found Hemraj's body that the toilet in Hemraj's room looked like it had been used by, more than one person. And on top of that, there were indentations on the bed. Yeah. So this led to this whole theory that maybe there were like 3 or even 4 people in that room at some point during the night.
Okay. So that definitely shifts the focus away from the parents.
At least for a little while.
So did the CBI try to connect these mystery guests to the murders? How did they do that?
Well, they started digging into Hemraj's life, his social circle, and they focused on this guy, Krishna Thadarai. He was the Talwars dental assistant.
Okay.
And like Hemraj, he was also Nepali, and he lived in the same apartment complex.
So maybe they were friends hanging out that night. But why would they kill Aarushi?
That's the million-dollar question. But the CBI, they find out that Rajesh had actually reprimanded Krishna a few days before the murders because Krishna messed up a dental cast.
A dental cast?
Yeah. So the theory is that maybe Krishna wanted revenge and he was involved somehow.
Revenge for a messed up dental cast? Seems a little extreme.
Right, it does. So the CBI, they bring Krishna in for questioning. And this is where things get really controversial. They do a polygraph test on him, but the results are inconclusive.
What does that even mean?
It means they can't really tell if he's lying or not, so they decide to do a narco-analysis test. It's also called a narco test.
Okay, now I've heard of those, but I don't really know what they are.
It's basically where they inject the person with a truth serum.
Truth serum? Wow.
Yeah, it puts them in this kind of semi-conscious state where they're more likely to spill the beans.
So is that, legal?
It's really controversial. A lot of people say it's not reliable. And it can lead to false confessions.
Oh, wow. So what did Krishna say during his narco test? Did it actually help the case?
It's not that simple. Footage of the narco test was actually leaked in 2015. And it shows Krishna giving, multiple confessions, and they contradict each other.
Multiple. So he's saying different things.
Yeah. And he implicates not only himself, but also 2 other servants, Rajkumar, who was another servant in the area, and Vijay Mandal, the housekeeper we talked about earlier.
Wait a minute. Now there are 3 servants possibly involved. This is getting confusing.
Right, it's hard to keep track. In one version, Krishna says that Rajkumar tried to assault Aarushi, and that he, Krishna, killed her with a kukri to protect her. A kukri is a Nepali knife.
Oh, okay.
But then there's another version where he says Rajkumar and Mandal were the ones trying to assault Aarushi, and that all 3 of them killed Hemraj on the terrace to keep him quiet.
So who's telling the truth?
Exactly, and that's the big problem with narco tests. You can't really rely on them because they're not admissible in court.
Why would the CBI even use them if they know they're not reliable?
Good question. A lot of legal experts have said that these tests are just a spectacle for the media. They make it look like there's progress in the case, but they don't really get you closer to the truth.
So if the results of these tests can't be used in court, did the CBI arrest the 3 servants anyway?
Well, they detained all 3. And get this, they found a bloody kukri at Krishna's place.
Whoa.
And they found a T-shirt with faint blood stains that belonged to Rajkumar.
So there was physical evidence.
It seemed like it, but remember, the narco test results couldn't be used. And the other evidence was circumstantial at best. Plus, the families of the accused servants were adamant that they were innocent. And as the investigation went on, other evidence started to contradict the CBI's story. For example, the security guards at the complex said they didn't see anyone entering or leaving the Talwar apartment that night. And there was nothing to show that the three servants even knew each other well enough to plan something like this.
Okay, so the servant theory starts to fall apart. If it wasn't them, who was it? Did the CBI have any other leads?
With the servant theory out, the spotlight kind of reluctantly shifts back to the Talwars. Remember those golf clubs we talked about earlier?
Yeah.
Well, they come back into the picture in a big way.
Oh, tell me more. What's the deal with those golf clubs? How do they fit into this whole thing?
Rajesh was an amateur golfer, and when the CBI looked at his set of golf clubs, one of them matched the dimensions of the wounds on both Aarushi and Hemraj perfectly.
Wow. So did the CBI think they finally had their answer? Was that the smoking gun?
It seemed like a big break, but there was a big problem. No biological evidence.
What do you mean?
There was no blood, no DNA, nothing on that specific club that connected it directly to the murders. Plus, here's another weird thing. 2 of the clubs looked like they had been cleaned really well, like someone was trying to get rid of any, traces of anything.
That's pretty suspicious.
Right. And when you add that to all the other weird stuff, like the staged crime scene and the whiskey bottle.
It does look pretty bad for the parents.
Yeah.
So what did the CBI do then? Did they arrest the Talwars again?
They didn't arrest them right away. They seemed to be struggling with this whole lack of evidence thing. They had the golf club, the cleaning, and how the parents had acted before. But they didn't have any solid proof that the Talwars did it.
So were they just going to give up? Just leave the case unsolved?
Well, they made a pretty controversial decision. In December 2010, they submitted a closure report. They basically said the case should be closed because there wasn't enough evidence.
Hold on, a closure report? But they still didn't know who did it. How could they just close the case like that?
It's a crazy decision. A lot of people disagreed with it. In the report, the CBI said that even though they suspected the servants at first, the narco tests were reliable and the servants all had alibis. They also said it couldn't have been an intruder because there was no forced entry and there wasn't a clear motive.
So what, they were saying it had to be the parents just because they couldn't think of anyone else?
Pretty much. The closure report kept bringing up the same points. The crime scene looked staged, there was no forced entry, the wounds looked like they were made by a professional, Rajesh wouldn't give them the key to the terrace, and those golf clubs were suspiciously clean.
It sounds like they were building their case on a lot of what-ifs, but is that enough to convict someone of murder?
That's the question at the heart of this whole case. It's about relying on circumstantial evidence, especially in a case that was this big and this emotional.
And speaking of big and emotional, how did the public react to this closure report? Were people okay with it?
Oh, it was a media frenzy. By this point, public opinion had turned against the Talwars big time.
Yeah, I remember that. The media was all over this case.
Constantly. And then there was that scary incident where Rajesh was attacked with a meat cleaver on his way to court.
Oh yeah, people were really angry.
Yeah, and despite the closure report, the Talwars, they kept fighting to keep the investigation open. They said they were really disappointed in how the system was handling the case and insisted they were innocent. But people still suspected them.
So what happened then? Was that it? Was the Aarushi Hemraj case finally over?
Nope, not even close. The story wasn't over yet. That closure report might have said to stop investigating, but the Talwars weren't going to let it go. They wanted to clear their names.
So the Talwars, they weren't just going to let that closure report be the end of it, right?
Exactly. They fought back, challenged it in court, and that's what led to the case being reopened and a full-blown trial.
So from closing the case to a trial, wow, did they find some new evidence or something? Some big reveal?
You'd think so, right? But that's the thing, there wasn't any dramatic new evidence. It all came down to that same old circumstantial evidence, the stuff in the closure report.
Wait, so they put the Talwars on trial for murder based on, maybes? I mean, the staged crime scene, the cleaned golf club, the router stuff. That doesn't actually prove they did it.
Yeah, that was the whole debate during the trial, and even before that, in the public eye. Can you actually send someone to prison based on circumstantial evidence? Where was the proof? Where's the smoking gun? Right.
Right. And what about Arushi's phone? You said they found it, but the memory card was missing.
Yep. Arushi's Nokia, it vanished after the murders. Turns up later with some guy who said his sister found it in a park. They checked out okay, but the memory card was gone. Whatever was on it, any clues. Poof, gone.
Just another weird thing in this case. So what happened at the trial? Did all that circumstantial stuff hold up in court?
It did. The Talwars, they were found guilty in 2013. Convicted on that circumstantial evidence and given life sentences.
Life in prison. But you said the evidence was weak. How could they do that?
A lot of people were really upset about it, even legal experts. They said the prosecution didn't actually show what happened clearly, and that the whole case was basically guesswork.
This is where it gets really interesting, public opinion, media pressure, and the courts trying to make sense of this case that just had holes everywhere.
Absolutely. This case still gets talked about because of that. It makes us think about how the media affects what people believe, whether circumstantial evidence is enough, and if the legal system can actually get things wrong.
So the Talwars, they got life sentences. Did they end up spending the rest of their lives in prison?
Actually, no. Big twist. The Allahabad High Court, they acquitted them in 2017, completely overturned the guilty verdict.
Wow. After all that time in prison, why? What made them change their mind?
The High Court agreed with those who criticized the first trial. They said the prosecution messed up, they didn't show a clear sequence of events, and the circumstantial evidence was just too weak to justify a guilty verdict.
So after all that, investigations, trials, media, public back and forth, the Aarushi hemorrhage case, it's still unsolved.
Yep. Officially, it's still open. But no new suspects, no more arrests. Who killed Aarushi and Hemraj? Still a mystery.
This whole deep dive has been, it's been something. We've seen bad police work, different theories, weird clues, narco tests, media going crazy, a closure report that didn't make sense, a guilty verdict, then not guilty, and we still don't know what happened.
What this case really shows us is that we have to be careful about what we believe. We need to look at real evidence, because things aren't always what they seem, and sometimes, even with all the attention and investigations, the truth stays hidden.
What about the media? They played a big part in all of this, right?
Oh, absolutely. The media, they shaped the story, they told us what to think. From that whole servant did it idea at the beginning to focusing on every little thing the Talwars did, the media made this case huge. And sometimes they mixed up facts and speculation, which didn't help.
This deep dive, it's definitely given us a lot to think about. What stands out to you the most about this case? Are there any other theories that you think are interesting? What are some details that stick with you? The conversation doesn't stop here. Let this case be a reminder that things aren't always black and white, and that sometimes, even with all the information in the world, the truth can still be a mystery.